Welcome back. Video 3 of Module 3 on your rebuttal speech. And we are looking at the last two main points of the speech. In the previous video, we talked about turning the tables, which require you to know the structure of an argument, the basic structure of an argument, and what the warrant, the claim, and the evidence is. So we're going to build on that in this video because we've talked about the difference between a claim and evidence, but we also need to explore that there are different types of claims. So this gets us into Stasis theory, and you've got a handy little reading in your course pack. It's not a particularly complicated theory, but it is something that you're not taught, but it makes a big difference in your ability to deconstruct an argument. And now my course pack is freaking out. All right, so Stasis theory, which means sort of like your stance or your standing, it is just basically a theory of different issues that need to be debated when you're deciding on any kind of basically a decision. And so the example they give is like you're standing with a group of people and you're debating something. It could be like where to go to dinner. It could be, I don't know, like who the best superhero is, whatever. Before you can contribute to the conversation, you need to figure out what the point is. Like, what's the question being discussed and what are the sides? And this is important because a lot of times we'll just like have debates about just random stuff. So somebody will suddenly just be like, socialism is bad. And it's like, okay, well, that's like a huge claim. And I can't debate that because I don't really know what exactly you're arguing, right? So you have a general argument, socialism is bad, or college is a waste of money, that kind of stuff. But like, what is the specific set of claims that we need to address in order to make a decision about whether or not socialism is bad? So Stasis theory basically says that there are four questions that you have to sort of address as part of any debate. And any debate can be any of these four questions. So these are all just four different ways of going at a debate. So it's not like some topics go with some questions. It doesn't work that way. So here are the four questions, and most people recommend that you address them in this order because you'll see, because they flow together. Because as you answer one question, you're able to answer the next question. So, did something happen? What is the nature of the thing happened? What is the quality of the thing that happened, and what action should be taken? So, like the legal system is a really good example. Stasis theory is most often demonstrated in courtrooms, and sometimes like in Congress when they're making laws. So, first of all, like, did something happen? Right? Did somebody murder somebody or not murder somebody? And let's suppose they did murder somebody. What's the origin of the murder? What's the nature of the murder? Right? That's why we have like, did they intend it? Was it cold-blooded? All that kind of stuff. What's the quality? That's things like, is it good or bad? Like was it self-defense? That kind of jazz. And then based on that, what should we do? And that's where we decide the penalty. So those are the four kind of questions you want to ask about whatever debate it is you're looking at. So let's delve into each one of these further. And you can Google Stasis theory. So the problem with Stasis theory is that there are different versions. I like this 4-question version. Some versions have 3 questions, some versions have 5 questions. But if you want to learn more about this, there are videos and articles on the internet. But just make sure that you're looking at all 4 of these questions because this is the one I want you to know. I don't want you to learn another version. All right, first of all, there's this whole, what we call claims or questions of conjecture, which sometimes are also called questions of fact. So did it happen? Does it exist? And there are other ways to think about this, right? Does X cause Y? Can you observe it? So basically the way I explain this is like, if there were an omnipotent being that knew all, the omnipotent being would probably know the answer to this question. Like, is global carbon emissions causing climate change? If there were a God, the God could tell you whether or not it's causing climate change, right? Was JFK shot by the government? Somebody somewhere, dead or alive, knows whether or not JFK was shot by the government. We probably will never know, so we have to debate it. Just like we'll probably never know for sure 100% what's causing climate change, but we can debate it. So questions of fact, I like to describe them as someone probably knows the answer to this, but we probably will never have that answer. Now, questions of fact or conjecture are different than facts. A fact is, I weigh 178 pounds. Okay? That's a fact, right? It's not disputable. Claims or questions of fact are debatable, disputable questions of a factual nature. That doesn't mean they're facts. This is super confusing for people. So it's not a fact. Like, for example, does my weight give me knee pain is a question of fact. Right? Does it cause knee pain is a question of fact. But the fact that I weigh 178 pounds is not a claim of conjecture. And conjecture, by the way, is just a fancy word that means like to speculate if something is true, okay? Did it happen? Does it exist? Does X cause Y? Is it true or false? Those are your questions of fact. We're going to come back to this, right? Because you'll see over here in main point 1 that you need to dispute a fact claim for your opposition. You don't necessarily need to do it first, but as one of your main points, you have to do that. All right. What is its nature? So this is a question of definition. How do we define it? What category does it belong to? How do we classify it? This is not something that an omnipotent being would know. This is a choice that human beings make all the time. This is not like anything that we can ever determine forever. So whereas a conjectural claim, it's like, well, maybe somebody somewhere throughout history, or if they're, like I said, we're like an omnipotent being that ruled the world, maybe they would know. But definition is something that we make up. So is something sexual harassment? Depends on how you define sexual harassment, right? So there might be an argument over definition here. Is cheerleading a sport? Is 178 pounds for a 5'10" woman fat, right? Those are all questions of whether something belongs to something else. Can we define it as this? Can we classify it as this, all right? Then we have, oh, real quick too. The other thing about claims of definition is they're not always explicit. So for example, if I say, if I use the word illegal alien, I'm making a claim of definition about what a person who is in the United States without citizenship is. So sometimes those claims of definition are pretty sneaky. So when you're looking for the kinds of claims of definition that your opponents are making, it's not always going to be as explicit as, we define blank as blank. So, you know, for example, is a plant-based diet veganism? Right? So if I say, oh, I eat a plant-based diet, does that belong to the category of veganism? Meaning, do you eat plant-based diets at the exclusion of meat? Or do you mostly eat plants, but then occasionally you throw in some eggs and some cheese and stuff? So I'm trying to define what it is that you're doing. But a lot of times, you'll see people argue for the health benefits of a plant-based diet, which is a fact, right? Plant-based diets make you healthier. It's a fact claim, okay? A plant-based diet is or is not veganism is a definitional claim, right? It's saying whether or not it belongs to the category of veganism. But people don't often make their definitions explicit, right? They kind of bury them through their language choice. So you really have to watch for that language choice, because if you notice that someone's using a word to label something, right? Labels, like labeling is a form of definition. So if you notice someone using a label, don't just assume that that's true. Think about, like, is that label doing certain argument work for them? Like, for example, whether you call it like climate change or global warming, people who call it climate change often are saying it's just something that happens, the climate is just changing. People call it global warming, they usually are trying to like push a different kind of agenda. So you got to be careful, because the language determines the kind of argument that they're making. And sometimes it'll happen totally by accident. For example, I often hear people who are pro-life use the term abortion when we're talking about terminating pregnancies, but the other phrase you could use is terminating pregnancies, because it depends, because sometimes people use the word abortion on purpose, but sometimes they use it by accident because that's what everyone else calls it. But when you call it a pregnancy termination, that's about making it like a neutral medical procedure, not kind of this value moral laden concept of abortion. So sometimes we use language by accident because that's what everyone else uses, but really if we were to kind of push on using different language, we might get different results. And you'll see me do that sometimes in class. I'll kind of insist on a certain term because I want to change the way we're thinking about a concept. So I don't just want to resort to like prepackaged language, right? I want to think about very intentionally which terms I'm using because they advance certain arguments. All right. What is its quality? So quality is kind of like generally whether it's good or bad, but typically it has to do with which values it promotes. So usually some arguments promote some values and other arguments promote other values. So for example, if I'm saying that like you should eat meat because the human body was meant to eat meat, I'm promoting like individual health and wellness over, so let's suppose the human body was meant to eat meat. You should still eat animals because it's better for the planet. So if we can agree, like let's just say we can agree that human beings were meant to eat meat, right? We're physically designed to eat meat. Let's just assume. I'm not saying that that's true, right? That's a question of fact. Were we designed to eat? Well, this one's kind of tricky. Like, were we designed to eat meat? Depending on how you phrase it, that could be a question of fact, or it could be a question of definition. So they're not always super clean cut, but as long as you have a good reason why you're calling them one or the other, I don't think it matters, as long because it could fit in either one. But if we can agree that human beings are designed to eat meat, right? We got like canine teeth and we got all the enzymes. But we can also agree that generally speaking, a plant-based diet is better for the environment. Then we have to choose between humans and the environment. Which one's more important? My individual well-being and how much protein I get and whether I can go big, strong muscles or blah, blah, blah. Or the fate of the planet, right? So a lot of times, whatever argument we're advancing connects itself to certain values. All right, then there's this question of policy, which action should be taken. So what should we do about it? This one's an easy one. Anytime someone's saying we should take an action or we should do this or we shouldn't do that, like you should be a vegan, it's a policy. So for most of us, this number 4, this policy, is going to be our thesis. And I really strongly recommend that when you're talking about an argument from the opponent, you focus on a policy argument. It makes the speech just way easier. If I put, I rebut the argument that veganism helps the environment, I'm making the work harder on myself. So try to put a policy in your thesis. So in this case, I rebut the argument that people should become vegan to help the environment, right? So it's a clear policy argument. So that takes care of claim 4, the policy. The policy is just going to be in your thesis, all right? Then what we need to do is we need to do 2 things. The first thing is we're going to do what everyone always does, which is I want you to find a claim of fact that your opponent uses and says is true or proves is true to support their argument. And I just want you to make a counterclaim of fact. So this is what most of us do when we argue. Somebody else says something is true, they assert a fact as true, right? And you are like, no, that's not true. And then you find a counterfact. This is like the bargain basement version of arguing. But I want you to start here because this is like still what most people do. I want you to know how to do that. So remember, facts are not the same thing as claims of fact. So, like for example, human beings possess, what's the amino acid? Amino acid that digests protein. I think it's called protease. Protein absorption. I think it's called protease. Pancreatic enzymes, trypsin, okay, whatever. So, human beings have a pancreas and a small intestine that produce the enzymes trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase that are meant for digesting animal proteins. This is not a claim of fact. This is just a fact. Right? Nobody on earth in their right mind is going to be like, oh no, we don't possess that protein. Like we just do. Or that enzyme. No, we just have it. Like it's in our body. Unless you've had a Whipple, which is the removal of your gallbladder. Now, whether or not that means that we're supposed to eat meat is not the question. But it's not a question of fact whether or not we have the ability to digest animal proteins. We have the ability to digest animal proteins. Okay? Maybe not dairy, that's a different thing, but just like pure meat, we have the protein to digest it. That is a fact. Right? Okay. Are human beings efficient at digesting meat is a question of fact. Like, are humans efficient at digesting meat? Because people will debate this, right? People will say, oh yeah, human beings are super good at digesting meat. It's really good for us. We got the teeth, we got the enzymes, blah, 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 blah. Right? But other people are going to be like, no, we're not. We're meant to eat plants. This is why, like, right? So here's a good example. Scientific American 2013, should humans eat meat? So this is a policy question about whether or not you should eat meat. So this is probably going to be a good source because this is the claim that we're debating, whether or not people should eat meat. And we're going to read through and see what they say. So we're going to look for a claim of fact in support of veganism. So they are saying something is true or X causes Y. And again, we're focusing on the environmental piece because that's just kind of how I laid out my thesis. But if you wanted to focus on the health health impact, I wouldn't care. It's your speech. And you don't have to write about veganism either. In fact, you shouldn't. I'm just kind of giving you different options. Okay. So evolution and consequences of modern carnivory. Modern Western agricultures are heavily meat oriented. That's not a claim of fact. That's just a fact, right? It's a fact that our Western agriculture predominantly focuses on the production of meat. Western countries are the highest consumers of meat, as opposed to someplace like Bangladesh, which is primarily vegetarian, all right? So we're looking for a claim of fact. So something the article is claiming is true or causes something else. So let's keep going. Larger brains benefited, blah, blah, blah. Is this perfect? So global meat production rose from less than 50 tons in 1950 to about 100 tons in 1975. That's a fact. You could probably look and see if it's true, but I'm going to assume that from 1950 to 1975, like, meat production doubled. That seems right to me, so I'm probably not going to look at this as a claim of fact. I think it's just a statistic. What we're looking for is a claim of fact. So here's a good one. Meat is an environmentally expensive food. Large animals have inherently low efficiency of converting feed to muscle, and only modern broilers can be produced, blah, blah, blah. This translates into relatively large demands for cropland, water, fertilizers, etc. So the question is this a claim of fact that we can argue against? All right, so meat is environmentally expensive. Is a vegan diet less environmentally expensive? Because, of course, if you're going to debate a claim of fact, you have to prove it's debatable, because sometimes people are just right. All right, so here's an article from The Independent, which I trust, why veganism isn't as environmentally friendly as you might think. So you got to be careful of these sources. If you bring me some whack job sources, I'm not going to like it. So when in doubt, go back to that news source that I showed you previously to make sure that your source is falling somewhere within that ideological spectrum. And if you're not sure, most of these websites will have like an about or a funding page where you can check and see if they're up to anything. That veganism is, what did that article say? Environmentally expensive. Okay. The argument is inherently less environmentally expensive than eating meat is faulty, right? This is a fact claim. Does it exist, right? Is it less expensive or more expensive is a fact claim. How many dollars does it cost? Because somewhere, like, again, an omnipotent being, could look at the earth and be like, yeah, I can tell you because I can see and hear and know all things. The producing an avocado costs about the same as you buying a cow to eat, all right? So then we want to go through our supports. And our first supports is going to be the testimony from... Nope, not The Independent. What is it? No, not the Tree Hugger. What's this one called? Habits. So, according to Scientific American, meat eating is factually more environmentally taxing than a plant-based diet or whatever. And again, I'm going kind of fast here. Like, you really need to do your reading, but I've done a lot of reading on the veganism debate. You need to do as much reading on your topic of interest or listening or watching as I have on the veganism debate. Otherwise, you're going to have a stupid argument because you have no idea what you're talking about. All right. And then we're going to put in our footnote, right? Remember, if we're going to put an insert, we're going to put a little footnote in there. We're going to put the little citation. I don't care what format you use. Just get it in there so if that is somebody's like, where'd you get your citation? You can actually give it to them. All right. And then... if you want details, that's fine. You can put details. I don't know that you need one. And then the other support is going to be another testimony. Can't spell. Testimony. Oh, no, that's McLean. Testimony. Okay. Then we got another testimony from Independent that foods like avocados and quinoa, which are staples of the vegan, vegetarian, well, they're not really staples of the vegan, they're a staple of all plant-based diets in the West, have had prices driven up by consumers so that people who produce them can't afford to eat them, right? So what we're saying is that, yeah, you may say factually meat eating is more environmentally taxing, but actually sometimes it's not. I don't know why that ding happens. I can't turn it off. All right, see what happens? And then if you want to add a detail, you can, right? Kind of like if you want to explain it. Notice one of the things I'm trying not to do here is I'm trying not to, I am telling people where I got the source, but I'm trying not to quote. Like, yeah, it'd be really easy for me to like copy and paste, huge copy, huge paste into my outline. But what's going to happen is then you're going to read the speech because you're going to have to read all the quotes and you're not going to know what you're talking about. So if as you're writing, you paraphrase, you don't have to memorize because then you'll lose points on delivery because you're looking at your paper the whole time. All right. Now we have two testimony here, which I don't love. So I might choose an occurrence for my third support. An occurrence is just a case study of something that's actually happening in the world that's real. So I might look for like story about quinoa producer who can't afford quinoa. So I'm looking for like a concrete, specific occurrence of this problem because I don't just want to read sources to my audience. Like, that's super boring. Your quinoa habit really didn't help Peru's poor, from NPR 2016. All right, I love this. So notice how we're getting more specific. We're going from a vague fact claim that avocados and quinoa are taxing on people and therefore it's not maybe as environmentally friendly as we say. And we're getting into the specifics, like we're in the country of Peru. So I'm looking for like a little occurrence, right? The price of quinoa tripled from 2006 to 2013 as America and Europe discovered this new superfood. That's a statistic. This could be another support. But we've already got some testimony, so I'm not sure we want a statistic because testimony and statistics are both kind of dry. The data source randomly selected is very rich, but it's as for people who didn't eat but grow quinoa, they are roughly twice as well off as those who grow it. The working paper, what about nutrition? I'm looking for like here we go. Bolivian. No, that's not good. So more numbers, more stats, more stats. Notice how obsessed people are with stats. So I'm not saying don't use some stats and some testimony, but they can't be all that you use, or else it's going to be a really dry paper, really dry speech. There's got to be like an example of somebody on the ground. Drucker's student, see, this is more testimony. High prices. But of course, see, now this argument is arguing that the high prices are good because they actually drive up the more. So notice, that's why they're questions of fact, because you can't prove them for certain. Because every time you make a claim of fact, somebody else will make a counterclaim of fact, and they'll have evidence and you'll have evidence, all right? Why you can't eat quinoa with a clear conscience. Let's see if we get something better. See, eating quinoa doesn't hurt Peruvian farmers, right? So there's a counterclaim. So maybe if you read an article that's like, actually, this whole thing about quinoa kind of overinflated, you may want to go back to your outline and find a different argument. Because you may just decide that this argument doesn't quite hold water. A classic case of media pump and dump. The Wonder Grain has gone from being lauded as a superfood as a genuine miracle food cultivated millennia instead of voracious demands such blah, blah, blah. Many are left with the impression that eating quinoa in the wealthy north, but it wasn't. Oh, see, here's another article saying that this quinoa thing isn't true. So, again, like I said, it's all about argument, but I'm still wondering if there's the ethically dubious choice it once was painted as, but its introduction into the global trade has been turbulent. If wealthy consumers are going to buy quinoa, they should demand to know exactly which sort of quinoa they are purchasing. For head of ITC, oh, come on, I need like an example. Quinoa bad for, that's slate. Don't worry about Bolivians who can't. This one was separate, like for quinoa could have been her producers rather than helping them. Oh, here we go. Let's see what this one is. How quinoa is changing farmers' lives in Peru. See, it's okay to eat quinoa from Slate, which by the way leads left. So my hunch is if the Slate thinks it's not a big deal, it's probably not a big deal. So, if I were gonna actually write this speech, I might go back and change my argument because I don't want national competition. So now we're kind of back to the idea. Here we go. This is lovely. So this tells the story of Rodrigo Cisneros, looks out at his fields of bright yellow quinoa plants extending far over the rolling slopes of the Andes. Just 5 years ago, Mr. Cisneros had a small plot of land growing food mainly for his own family's consumption. He occasionally sold small loads of potatoes. Today, thanks to the global popularity of quinoa as a superfood, Mr. Cisneros, together with his two brothers, owns more than 20 hectares of land and employs 15 farm workers. My ancestors, my grandparents and parents have always grown quinoa. I grew up eating quinoa, but we didn't sell it. Earnings from quinoa have paid for his daughter to study at university in Lima, so they must be in Peru. He also has bought a solar panel and has electricity for the first time. In the evenings, he watches football. Okay, well, we don't need to get, like, into the whole, like, poor, like, this is getting a little bit, you know, like white Western condescending. So it's fine. I get it. He's got a thriving Peru business. He loves his football. Kids going to college. Cool. People wouldn't pay good money for it if it wasn't. They're not fools. Fried potatoes, blah, blah, blah. The price. So where's the problem? So he's got a bunch of money. We can educate our children. We go to bed early. They, too, have always eaten quinoa. So, okay, so that's not a good example because he's a guy who's doing well. But here we got Jonathan Contreras is the association's commercial manager. So he is like a little, I guess he's hard for individual small farmers to negotiate a price with traders and intermediaries. The majority of quinoa farmers still live in plots of small land. So now we're back to statistics, which we're trying to avoid. So I'm going to stop here, but what we're looking for is we want to keep kind of reading through these stories and try to see if we can find something to balance out the statistics and the testimony. Can we find an occurrence or a story about somebody? Because if you're going to argue that veganism is not necessarily the major corrective to all of this eating meat, then you're going to need evidence to support that, and it can't just be that some expert said it and also here's a number, right? You might want to find an occurrence. You can also make an analogy, okay? You can do all that stuff. All right, so this is the real easy one. This is just like, hey, my opponent has a claim of fact that they say is true. They have evidence to support it, but I say it's not true. I have evidence to support my perspective, right? This is what I call like basic argument. This is what everyone does every time you have an argument, right? We just fight over facts. So this one, you need to find an argument that they are making of fact that you think you can poke holes in. For this one, you need an argument of fact that you can't poke holes in. So for this one, you're looking for an argument of fact. So the opposition makes the, I wouldn't write this, but I'm just trying to show you what we're doing. The opposition makes the airtight factual claim, however, and now we're looking for a factual claim that is indisputable. That doesn't mean it's a fact. It means that it's a factual claim that you could dispute, but it's really not worth it, right? So, for example, the biggest argument in favor of veganism is that most people would do best on a plant-based diet. That's a fact, right? You can argue against it, but it's hard. Like, everybody, like, even people who are hardcore anti-vegans are still like, yeah, you should probably eat some plants. Like, that should probably be mostly of what's on your plate. So, you may not even need to use testimony from them. You might just be like, look, we call this seeding or conceding the argument. You're just like, yeah, okay, you're right. People should eat a plant-based diet. I'm here for it. You know, I'm not going to argue against this one. You win this one, all right? But then what you do, because you can't win on the fact claim. So here, you could win on the fact claim, so you fought fact with fact. But here, you can't win on the fact claim. So you've either got to slip to a claim of definition, or you have to slip to a claim of quality. You can do either one. Totally up to you. So I'll show you two different options. So option A, because don't do both, right? Unless you have a really short speech for some reason and you want to add a fourth main point, which I guess you could. Option A would be like, okay, I agree factually. It's probably true. People should eat a plant-based diet. But, okay, and then if we want to slip to definition, we might say plant-based isn't vegan, right? So for veganism, vegans will try to use the phrase plant-based as coincidental with veganism. Because every time somebody publishes a study that's like, plant-based diets are good for you, vegans are like, see, plant-based diets are good for you. But plant-based isn't vegan. And then you would need to find your evidence to support that. This is kind of a weird, because really these are like, these really aren't main points. So they're just, so this would go here, right? You would take this and you would move it in place of this, okay? So option A, all right, great, right? Yep, you're right. Plant-based diets are good. Agreed. But here's the thing. Plant-based isn't vegan. So I'm still proving that the argument people should become vegan because it helps the environment is not true. It's all you have to prove. You don't even need to say veganism needs to be bad, right? One of the traps of argument is that if something else is good, it needs to be bad. So, oh, you support veganism? Okay, well then I need to prove that like all we should eat is meat and bacon and cheese and dairy. No. You can say, I don't agree with the policy that people should become vegan in order to help the environment by just poking holes in the argument. That's all you have to do here. You do not need to prove the opposite of the argument. Because in fact, people should go plant-based. But plant-based isn't vegan. And here's my point, right? As an arguer. Like, look, I'm having a hard enough time just getting people to stop buying cheeseburgers from McDonald's. They don't need to be vegan. They need to eat a plant-based diet. And more important than that, they need to eat less food. Because everybody eats too much food, right? If you want to go kill a deer once a year, you want to eat 200 pounds of deer meat for the year, and that's all the meat you ever eat, you have an awesome carbon footprint, right? You're like barely registering on the environmental impact. Whereas if all you eat are Beyond Burgers in your 2-hour commute to work in your hybrid car at McDonald's or Burger King or whatever, you are horrible for the environment, but you're a vegan. You see the point? So you're just trying to poke holes in people's certainty over an argument. That's your only job. All right. So that would be option 1, is to slip the definition. You need to point out, hey, y'all are making a real funky definition claim here because you're using plant-based as synonymous with veganism, but it's not the same thing. So that would be slipping the definition. Right? You can't win the claim of fact because plant-based diets are like factually the best. So you slip to definition. Option B, all right? So like if you can't slip to the definition, so you can't win on fact, you can't slip definition, your policy's already the thesis, what are you left with? Quality, right? You slip to quality, right? So option B is slipping the quality. So again, weighing values, right? So if veganism promotes not eating animals as good for the environment, how are you going to beat, like, what's your value that you're going to out-argue them with? You got to think about this. So you got a couple options. One would be like individual well-being. Like, let me see if I can play right. We can't prioritize the well-being of the environment over people's consumer choice, right? You could choose consumer choice as a value. You could choose people's health as a value, right? Because up here we're talking about how it's good for the environment, but the environment is a value. You can beat our current president beats the value of the environment with business every time, right? Consumer choice, health, small businesses. I mean, all of these are values that you could argue are going to be hurt if we choose environment over any one of them. So you just need to find a counter value. All right? And then, of course, you need support to prove it. So you're going to have to find, like, what haven't you used yet? You got a lot of testimony in this speech. We got more testimony. We got maybe an analogy down here, maybe an occurrence up there. So we haven't done a narrative yet, like a personal narrative. Maybe you throw a personal narrative in there, whatever you want to do. So that's how you do it. So you pick one. You don't do both. You either slip the definition because you can't win fact, so you got to point out how one of their definitions is faulty, or you can't win the value. You can't win the fact, so you slip to a different value. All right? And again, these are your topics, so I can't tell you which value is more important than another value. You have to make that choice. And part of what's cool about this is you force people, instead of hiding behind facts, to lay their values on the table. right? That's the deal. You're forcing people to choose some values over another. And that's really where debate gets interesting, because it's super easy for people to prove like one fact is better than another fact. It's way harder when you're like, okay, so which is more important? My power as a consumer to buy and sell meat products, or, you know, keeping the environment from burning in a giant ball of flames. It's a hard choice. I mean, nobody wants to make that choice. That's why we don't like to argue about it. So you're going to force the argument, and then you're going to provide evidence for why your definitional or your value argument is superior. All right? And that gives you all three main points, and you can put them in any order you want, and then you know the deal for how to write an introduction and conclusion. It's the same exact as the way that we did it for the speech of self-introduction, so you can go back and you can rewatch, I think it was video 3. I think it's video 3 from that series that talks about intros and conclusions. You can also look at the sample speech, which actually, for the sample speech, the central idea thesis is in fact a claim of fact, which makes it a little bit weak. I'm hoping that you'll take my advice and choose a policy argument. And then don't forget, the preview statement is new. So the preview statement was not in the previous speech. Neither were main points. You didn't have any main points in the previous speech. So you need to have main points here. And then you're going to send it to me, and I'm going to rip it apart, because that's my job, and that's what you want me to do, because you don't want to be a half-assed person who doesn't know how to argue correctly. And then you're going to fix it. And one of the biggest issues is, like, if you're not reading and watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts on whatever debate you're looking at, if you're not listening to people who are making the debate that you don't agree with, you can't write the speech. You got to know what other people are saying, and you have to look for, like, good reasons. It's like, okay, I get why people want to promote veganism, right? I totally get why people think veganism is good for the environment. And I'm not even saying it's not. I'm just poking holes in the argument because that's my job. And I don't even have to have a counter proposal. My counter proposal is no, eat plant-based and eat less food. But I don't need to present a counter argument. I just have to rebut the existing argument. I don't have to present a counter argument. If I were a better teacher, I would make you present a counter argument. But honestly, like, anybody can argue their own point. Rebuttal is a whole different ball of wax. And that is the end of this video. So hopefully that was helpful, and you can always reach out if you have individual questions that were not answered in the video. Good luck.